Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Do you remember the time of the lockdown? Do you remember watching the television and listening to the news reports, particularly when the Prime Minister, remember old Boris Johnson with the haircut and stuff behind his podium? And we had the journalists sitting there asking awkward questions, those very awkward questions like, why are we locking down? And are we really... Oh, no, they didn't ask those questions. No, I forgot that. They weren't asking very many questions. What was going on in those newsrooms? Were they told not to ask specific questions? And what about now? We've had this vaccine that people have been told they ought to take. And it's turning out that perhaps that wasn't the best advice ever. Are they asking those questions? Well, I've asked it on this channel whether political places like Reform, why aren't they asking about this terrible atrocity that seems to have happened? Well, let's go and ask a journalist who was there at the time and find out what was going on at that time, and then also find out a little bit about his work now, because this particular journalist was in the mainstream, decided, actually, my conscience can't cope with this, and he's doing some good work now. His name is Callum, and he comes from Gather and Hunter TV, and he joins me now. Hello, Callum.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me on. It's Hunt and Gather TV, actually.
Yes, thank you for correcting that. My audience know that I just gabble something at the beginning of these interviews. As we were talking just before we started, that actually it's amazing how the audience don't mind mistakes and that sort of thing, whereas professional television, that's a sort of, we've got to get it absolutely right, or people won't believe it. And in fact, it's the slicker the program is, the less believable it becomes.
I think that's one of those inversion points that's gone on these days, that kind of the slicker something is now. I think there's a section of viewers who are less likely to believe it for the slickness.
Absolutely. So I'm going to get into a bit about your history and find out a little bit about newsrooms and why journalists weren't able to ask the questions that perhaps they wanted to in a moment. But you're in the middle of doing some fascinating work about the vaccine rollout, particularly with MPs and whether they took it, and whether they're still taking the boosters like they're telling everybody else to do.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a really simple idea, really. In the autumn last year, there are questions being asked about the safety of these products. I think where you fall on that spectrum, they're terribly, terribly dangerous and they should be banned, or, well, they're a bit dangerous, they should be looked at. There's a spectrum wherever you are on it. I think there are questions being asked that haven't been answered about the safety of these things. And it just occurred to us that in the autumn last year, people over the age of 65 were still being encouraged by NICE, and by the government, essentially, by the NHS. If you're over 65, go and get a jab. And we just wondered, given some of these concerns, are those politicians who are over that age still going to get theirs? So we got a list of all the politicians who are over the age of 65, and we simply started writing to them directly and asking them. And it's as simple as that, really. I mean, if I say John Gummer to you, does that mean anything to you?
Yes. Yes.
So you remember that whole thing during the British beef crisis, as it was called?
He
You
fed
remember?
it to his daughter, didn't he?
Well, he tried to. So
Ah.
for viewers who maybe don't remember the British beef scandal, there was a question mark over the safety of British beef. John Gummer, he was the Agriculture Secretary at the time, and he was at a constituency event in May, I think it was 1990, and he tried to feed a beef burger to his daughter to prove to kind of the assembled media that British beef was safe. She didn't eat it, actually, but
This was during the mad cow scare,
that's
wasn't it?
right.
The foot and mouth.
Mad cow scandal. No, not foot and mouth. Foot and mouth was later.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's right. Yes, because
Yeah,
that was in about 2000, wasn't it?
something like that. But this was the mad cow thing. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. British beef makes you mad, which went on for quite some time. You'll remember, and I think a couple of hundred people are thought to have died, if you believe that scandal happened. Some people don't,
Yeah,
but that's another story. But there he was, John Gummer, and he had this long, illustrious political career. He still sits in the House of Lords, I think, but that one moment is the thing that he is remembered for by most people. You remembered it when I mentioned him.
Yeah.
And it's even become known as, apparently, in Westminster, doing a Gummer, when, a politician enrolls their own family
Yeah.
to try and prove something safe. So we just wondered, are any of these politicians who are still eligible prepared to do a Gummer in relation to these products that there's these question marks over? So we just started writing to them, and we've been broadcasting these packages, broadcasting, narrowcasting, whatever you call it, in groups of 5.
YouTube.
Yeah. And just say whether they've given us an answer. And I think we've done 20 so far, and we haven't had any positive responses yet. So that's where we're at.
And your documentaries are available, and we'll put the link in the description to them anyway, so people can see that. And that's very interesting, isn't it? Because I know that my audience has been writing to their MPs, asking the same sort of questions. Not so much have you taken it, but is it safe? To quote Marathon Man, is it safe? And they'll write back, safe and effective, yeah, no problem, blah, blah, blah. But are they doing it themselves? And, that is a very interesting question. And if they're not doing it, why not? Do they know something we don't know? Or do they just feel it's not for them, And if you've been mandated it, you might feel a bit queasy about that sort of response.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I've asked 20 of them and none of them have replied either means they have taken it and they don't want to talk about it, or they haven't taken it in October last year and they don't want to talk about it. Those are the two options.
Yes.
We can't really read into those non-replies the fact they haven't taken it. But what we do in these little films is we go and grab all the prior public, all the public support that we heard from them at the time. You remember, I got my jab today. I thank you,
yes.
in Bognor, for giving me my jab. There was a lot of that going on. So we've gone and grabbed that, because if they say to us, well, it's none of your business whether I've had a private medical procedure, I would normally agree with that, 100%. It's not really anyone else's business. But when these people are elected representatives, and crucially, previously, they were very happy to come out in public and talk about how great these things were. In the overwhelming majority of cases, there are examples that you can find easily online of these MPs praising these things to the heavens. So the question is, why has there been a shift in their apparent attitude to doing that?
I mean, I know obviously we can only speculate on a number of these issues. Like, are they now beginning to regret being involved with the whole thing in the first place, taking it if they did, recommending it to others? Are they still saying it's safe and effective? And there's many areas, and as you say, they are our elected representatives who are giving us almost directives of how to lead our lives.
That's right. And I mean, the 3 things we asked them are: have you taken the jab in October this year? Would you be prepared to state publicly that you've done so? And would you encourage your family, friends, and constituents to do the same? Because you see, they won't lie. If they haven't taken it, they won't lie and say they have, because that can too easily come back and bite them later. So yes. the sort of, if they don't want to say no, then the sensible thing to do is to say nothing, which is what we've got from all of them so far. So yeah, people want to watch those videos. We've got the YouTube channel is just Hunt and Gather TV, Hunt and Gather, all one word, and then TV on the end, and they're all there. They're not very long. They're only sort of 10 minutes. 5 MPs per episode, and we've got 53 altogether who we've written to. So we're just banging them out in batches of 5, basically. And the question will be, by the time you get to 53, is it still 53 no no comments? Essentially,
Mm.
is what it is, right? No comment. We don't want to talk about that when
Yes.
they were.
And as you say, I mean, I completely agree. Somebody's personal medical history is nobody else's business, of course, except that we had gone through an extraordinary time, unprecedented in certainly in my lifetime, where a certain medical intervention was pushed on us very heavily by government as well as mainstream media, and having 4 years later, with quite a lot of harms as a result of that, it would be nice to know whether they still stand by some of those original statements. So and then people can draw their own conclusions, of course. You also worked very closely, or still do, with Andrew Bridgen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was a reporter at ITV News Central, and that's how I met Andrew, because his patch was on our patch. So I met him at an event one day, and it was just after he had first asked the question in Prime Minister's questions about vaccine harms. So we got chatting about that, and it went from there, really, because he was the only politician who was asking questions about this. And I was working in a newsroom, and we were forever saying to people, if you've got a story, please email us. And I'd been told by a young colleague that people were starting to email about vaccine harms, and these emails just sort of quietly disappeared from the communal inbox. This is what a younger colleague who monitored that inbox told me. So I was kind of really upset about that, because why are
Mm.
we telling people to email us with stories and then ignoring them when they do on a matter that is that serious? It's something that's being given to everybody.
Yes.
And I just came at it from a purely journalistic point of view, which is, if someone says there's something bad going on over there, you at least go and have a look as a journalist. What's the downside in going to have a look? Right.
Yes.
Oh, but people will think you're crazy if you go and look at that. Well, you've got to go and look at it. That's your job. It's literally your job. So,
If only to discount it from,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. You say, no, them over there saying that are crazy. Well, have you been to speak to them? No, but I know they're crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Our job is to just go and look. Right. But this was, no, we don't look. We don't look at that issue. And it was just made very clear by kind of um, comments that were made in meetings in that setting, that those kind of lines of inquiry wouldn't be tolerated. There was only one narrative, and that was that these products were safe and effective, and that they were going to get us out of the pandemic. And that was the line. And it was the first time in a journalistic career that I thought journalism was, someone says A, you go and find someone else who says B, and then you let the viewer decide who they believe.
Right.
But this was the first time it was like, no, we don't need a B. We can just have A and stick with that. And I just found it very strange.
Journalists these days, a bit like estate agents now, um, are deemed as, particularly online ones, sorry, mainstream media ones, have got such a bad reputation, particularly going through the lockdown period, when they didn't seem to be asking the questions that the public would like them to ask. And I remember watching. I didn't have a television at the time, but watching the online feeds of various things, and you'd watch the question time at Prime Minister, not Prime Minister questions, but when Boris is being asked by the journalist who had the set few questions to answer at his podium, after our briefing that we were all being told we've got to stay in. We're there to flatten the curve. 3 weeks to flatten the curve. And the journalists were asking questions, but they were clearly not asking the sort of questions that I wanted to have answered, and anybody I spoke to when I was doing shows or met people. They were sort of, well, why aren't we locking down longer? You know, they're sort of asking the questions, why aren't you doing more, but more bad stuff rather than why are we doing this in the first place. And so it seems that journalism in the mainstream has got a really bad name because nobody's asking the questions. How did that make you feel at the time when you're eager to go, well, what's the other side of the story then?
Yeah, I mean, I think with lockdown, it wasn't as prominent for me as when the vaccines rolled out. That was when I really realized there is a whole other side to this. People, lots, significant numbers of people are saying that they are being injured. Whether they are being injured or killed or not, like I said before, it's not immediately the question. They are saying they are, should be enough to go and talk to them. And so it was when that all started and those people were being ignored, and they were being censored on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. That's when I really realized that something was wrong with the earlier lockdown. I didn't understand why there wasn't more questioning of the tactic, and I didn't understand why those questions weren't being asked. And I found that quite frightening because it was the first time, really, and this is going to sound naive, particularly to your viewers, I think, but it was the first time I realized that we weren't free. I always thought a TV newsroom is a sort of free thinking, creative place. But actually, it's not really. There's a very top-down editorial structure where the instructions do come down from management, and I guess I just hadn't realised how strict that process was until that moment when it was just made very clear that there were certain questions that weren't to be asked. And like you say, the questions were, you're not going far enough. It was strange what Mr. Johnson did, wasn't it, really? Because he appeared to be tacking in one direction and then he tacked back the other way. Do you remember? And I guess people thought he was making the case and then he suddenly wasn't. And I don't know, but I found it very worrying. And it was really a progression towards leaving from there for me.
So at what point did you decide that mainstream journalism was not for you?
It was around the vaccine thing, and I mean there were two things. There was also this judge's investigation that I'd been working on, where I was looking into some corrupt practices by some judges in London, and I was doing that sort of in my spare time. And when ITV were contacted by the lawyers, they didn't respond in the way that I expected them to. I expected them to take my side, and I'm just not sure they did, really. But I don't want to talk about that too much. But that was when I decided that I probably had to leave, because this story about the judges, which again is on our YouTube and people can watch it there, and I'd encourage people to go and watch it. I realised that story wasn't really welcome at ITV, or it might not be. So that was the other reason that I kind of had to go. Yeah.
Just to go back, then I wanted to find out. I was asking, did you go to journalistic school?
Well, there's the National Council for the Training of Journalists, which offers a very basic qualification, which is divided into sort of, you learn shorthand actually still. You learn how to do news reporting. It's a kind of professional qualification that you can get, and a lot of the courses are built around that. Built up into bigger courses, but that's the kind of kernel of it. So I've got that qualification, but apart from that, I've got a degree, and then I've got that qualification, and then all the rest of it you learn on the job.
With the proliferation now of people like me and many others, probably more qualified than me, because I'm not qualified at all to talk about anything. The social media has loads of amateur journalists, people journalists, I don't know what you call them, putting stuff out. How do we know what's true? Because it seems to me that actually, in the end, all of this is really just entertainment rather than genuine informing people of what's actually going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question, but it does seem as though the citizen journalists, alternative journalists, whatever you want to call them, they do talk about things that are simply off limits
Mm.
in the mainstream. So in that, for that reason alone, are they not providing an absolutely essential service? There are issues that lots of people feel need to be spoken about, which get ignored by the centralized legacy media. So someone needs to talk about them. And even if they're embellishing, they're still being talked about. And it's a decentralized model. So it's much harder to get all those disparate individuals in their bedrooms to tell the same lie at the
Mm.
same time. But I think the 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 viewer needs to behave like a grown up and needs to be treated like a grown up by regulators, i.e., well, I've watched this on Richard Vobes' show, but I'm not going to go and mortgage my house based on the information I've learned because it might not be true.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to go and find out from 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other sources of information whether it's true or not, and then I'll make my decision. Now, that's what a grown up would do. But the idea that you're going to, people talk about regulation, the Online Safety Act, which is coming now of the internet. Well, who does the regulating? Who decides what's true or not? Then it becomes the question, and
Mm.
it's also babying the viewers. But why do they need some civil servant in Whitehall to Westminster to tell them what's true and what's not? They're grown-ups. Why can't they just go and find out for themselves? That's
Well,
how I.
exactly. I mean, I mean, I totally agree with you. I
Mm.
mean, what, because you don't know their views, their background, and what makes them tick, and yet they're going to say it's like censorship on films back in
Yes.
the day when they used to censor films. Effectively, it's the same thing, saying, "Well, we know better than you." I mean, I remember when Frankie Goes to Hollywood put out Relax, and because Radio One said, "Oh, we can't put that on," and so as a result of that, everybody wanted to know what it is. And every time you censor something, people go, well, what's so bad about that? Lady Chatterley's Lover was another one.
Yes.
Everybody wants, and in a way, censor some. If you want something, I mean, people do that deliberately now, don't they? Say, oh, we can't possibly show you this because it's far too bad for you. You wouldn't understand it. And people go, well, I want to now. And
Right.
and so they use that as a promotional tool.
Mm.
Why would you let anybody make these things? You've got to decide for yourself. But do you think? I mean, this is the problem. This is where we are at the moment. Is we have a media that has been baby talking to us for so long that people have lost that business of their own due diligence.
Yeah. I don't know enough about. I'm sure studies have been done on the effect of mass media and television on people's ability to think critically. But television is an incredibly powerful medium.
Mm.
People do just, especially the BBC, they won't believe something until they've seen it on the BBC. A lot of these people that we're talking about. And the way, especially the news, the way the bulletins are structured, they've got the same music at the top. So it's, you hear this music and now you're going to be ready to be given some very important information.
Yes.
And bulletins are all structured in the same way. A third of the way through, you have a recap of the headlines. And then there's always a story at the end, which is a bit light. It follows the same structure. And I guess that has the effect of
Well, it's
giving it
hypnotic. I mean,
credibility and authority.
it's definitely hypnotic and trance-inducing because you get and the whole business with the cinematic music and the drums
Yes.
and the urgency. And you can see one story where it's talking about tanks invading a country and people getting killed or what have you, and it's all big bang bang bang, and then the same sort of feel and music and graphics that come in will be about Mrs. Miggs has lost her cat, and there's no sort of this is a powerful story and this is less powerful. It's all like, all of it's urgent, all of it's, you've got to listen to this, and if you don't listen to this you're going to die, which you don't get as much on social media, because do a story about Mrs. Miggs' cat and it might be a bit humorous and you're expecting to laugh, and I think the producers of this sort of light stuff, that they know, in a way, we YouTubers are learning our craft because we're gauging how many people watch. We don't have to rely on the radar figures and things like that, and people lying and saying, yeah, I did watch your program when they didn't, because we'll get the detail from from YouTube and other platforms, which is really useful.
This is the other thing that I want to, how reliable is the data for broadcast media that says, I mean, I don't know, but I think it's a kind of sampling system where, Richard Vobes was watching this at this time, therefore all the other white bald men of Richard Vobes' age are watching the same thing at the same time, and we can extrapolate. I think that's how it works. I'm not sure.
Well, I certainly used to work that way. I mean, I've actually had to. I was at my old girlfriend's, not the current one, house, and the radar figures questionnaire came in, and you had to do it for a week. And having spoken to a few people who've done it, and they said, "Oh, I just tick it, yeah," because it's, most people don't want to fill in forms, so they just say, "Yeah, I listen to Radio 1, I listen to Radio 2, I watch this and I watch that," and what you really get from that, I have no idea, other than the fact that somebody somewhere turned the telly on, and of course the telly can be on and it's in the background, you're in the other room, and some people have it for company and some people specifically watch, and a lot of people throw their televisions out of the top story window these days, thank goodness.
So I'm really not sure that they know how many people are watching it.
I think if they knew, they would be more embarrassed about trying to get that bloody license fee out of us, because there wouldn't be enough people.
Yes, yeah.
Or if they had pay-per-view, that would be interesting to see how many people would actually pay for their programs. I mean, certainly the big lavish dramas and things like that, but a lot of the other filler programs, I mean, but there's always people. There's plenty of people in care homes now who end up watching Cash in the Attic and other those sort of programs.
Well, they can't reach the remote control.
No, they can't comprehend it.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up a bit. So you're working on this.
Yes.
What's your next project? Where are you going with your journalistic independent skills?
Well, I would like to just do a series interviewing vaccine injured and bereaved people. Really, that's something I'd like to do, and I'd like to try and find funding to do that, because I think.
Do you think there is funding?
I'm hopeful that there is.
Do you think the pharmaceutical companies will come? You must do that. You must. We really love you to do a documentary.
Sure I can't think in what universe they would, but it's a dream I have. And it's something to do with putting things right. I feel so bad about how these people were treated. I've spoken to quite a lot of vaccine injured people.
Yeah.
And I just feel so bad about the way they were treated. And one thing they say is nobody will listen to us. No journalist will listen to us. And I feel personally quite guilty when I hear that, because our job as journalists is supposed to be, I thought, just to listen, and then repeat what we've heard. And these people have got life-changing injuries, some of them, and they've lost loved ones, and they believe that it was to do with these medical products, right? And in a lot of cases, they've got very good reason for believing that. So they deserve to have those suspicions properly looked at, don't they? I think in a decent society, they just do, and I feel so bad. So that's what I'd like to do, is just a series where I listen to them, but whether it would be watched or not, I don't know. You could probably advise me about whether
Well,
that would.
but the end question, I was going to say, let's assume you've made this
Mm,
fantastic landmark
mm,
series,
mm.
going around talking to all these people. Never mind. I'm sure it would be wanted to be watched, because I'm sure a lot of people would be fascinated to know, and especially historically down the
Yeah,
line. But the question is, what platform would be brave enough to put it on?
yeah. I mean, you would know more about this than me, really. I've only just started with this kind of thing, and with
Right.
the MP series that I'm doing, and with the judge thing as well that we did, which is called The Other Night. It's on our YouTube channel, and I really would ask people to go and look at it. But what we're doing is we're simply asking questions. With these judges, I mean, I won't say too much. It's hard to explain, and it would be easier if people just went and watched it. But it
Yeah.
it was about them having meetings behind the scenes, when they shouldn't. In court, they should just decide on what they've heard in court,
Right.
and they weren't. They were having meetings with a third party who'd been. There was this sort of triangle. But anyway, people should go and watch it. I recommend
Yeah.
it very highly, even if I do say so myself. But the point I'm making is, we just ask these judges questions. Did you meet with this person? Did you meet with that person? And with these MPs, we're simply asking them, did you take this product, and would you endorse it? It's a
Mm.
reasonable question to ask people. We're not sensationalizing anything. And that's why YouTube, I suppose, hasn't taken these things down, because we're not drawing any conclusions.
No,
We're just asking a question, and then we're publishing the answer, or in this case, the lack of any
the
answer.
lack of answers. Yes.
Mm. And I think with that as a tactic, it's kind of, you're quite safe from censorship.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, let's hope. We'll see.
Callum, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a fascinating conversation. Apologies to the audience if there's been a few edits and stuff to get round the internet problems. That is one of the snags. If you are ever down south, where I am, do come in and we'll do it in the studio.
Great. I would love to. Yeah, and thanks for
Yeah.
having me on. And yeah, please do go and check out our channel, everyone who's still watching. We've got 5 more of these things to put on, so we're only halfway through the series.
Yeah, and they are fascinating. They're very fascinating, especially when you start to see who it is that you've been in touch with. But we'll leave that to the viewer to go and look at. Well, there are, ladies and gentlemen, an inside story of a real journalist at the time who decided to get out. Absolutely been brilliant. Callum, I'm sure we'll talk again. To the lovely audience, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and all that business. I'll be back with more monologues and, of course, wonderful guests. Until next time, thank you for watching. And from Callum and I, goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.